Today, for episode 1, I have a very special guest. He's not just a guest, he's also a friend. And I promised him that he would be episode 1 on my show. So I'm honored to have him on. Who is he? Let's say he was a horse trainer for about 6 decades, standard bred, thoroughbred. He also loved gambling, got himself jammed up. Let me show you a quick clip so you understand who this next guest is.
As long as I could remember, I always wanted to be a gangster. I wanted it all. The scores, roads, the life. By the time I was 32, I had it all, and more money than I could count. But I didn't get there by being a wise guy. I got there because I knew horses. I was a horse trainer, and a good one. I knew how to race them to win, I knew how to race them to lose, and I knew the foolproof way to fix a race. And that's what I did better than anyone in the business. I was the best that ever was. I grew up in the streets of New York. From early on, I loved to race. I went from racing boxcars as a punk kid to racing horses with big money. And by the time I was 20, I knew all there was to know about racing horses. I can train any horse I want. But the world of horse racing was already teeming with corruption. After striking the deal with Whitey Boulder's top guy, I taught him the right way to fix a race, which would create a bigger payday than ever imagined. The odds were always in my favor, and the track was where I was king. By 1972, I was the top guy in the game. I ran a crew nationwide, fixing races at 39 different tracks, working with the top gangsters in the country, main guys, even bosses, raking in millions faster than I could spend it. I threw $1 million parties with a broad on each arm. Crooked politicians and celebrities eating out of the palms of my hand. They all wanted a piece of the action, and I ruled that game till I got in too deep. See, during this time, I had a problem. I got addicted to sports betting, and by 73, my addiction almost cost me my life. I was in over my head and owed close to $1 million to the wrong guys. I could either run, kill myself, or come clean. I came clean. I found myself on a yacht, forced at gunpoint into a 55-gallon drum with cement up to my knees, staring down one of the most dangerous mob bosses in New Jersey. He gave me a choice: either die right here or come up with the money I didn't have to save my life. Needless to say, I chose to save my life. After that, I pushed corruption to the limit. Desperate to pay the mob almost 20 grand a week, I was fixing more races, betting and washing hundreds of thousands of counterfeit bills, committing bank fraud in 3 states, scoring bullshit money with fringe lobsters, and that alone almost cost me my life on numerous occasions. And all the while, the feds are getting hot on my trail. Every day was a gamble just to get back right with the wrong people. Eventually, I paid off the mob, and I went straight, legit. I set out to build a new empire, an honest one, and I did. In just a few short years, I was back to training hundreds of top horses, where I trained winners. Soon I had one of the best racing saviors in the country. I had mansions in 3 states, with a broad in each one. I was working for billionaires, hanging out with politicians, and partying with celebrities. Most important, I was winning races. They say lightning don't strike the same place twice. But here I was again, making more money than I knew what to do. And I thought it would never end. Until one fateful Sunday in 1984, when I placed one last bet on a fixed race. And that bet cost me everything. I got busted by the racing commission red-handed. Instead of ratting on my old crew, the guys that built this business, I saw everything I had disappear practically overnight. My license, my horses, and eventually every penny I had to my name. I was barred from racing for life. And pretty soon I was broke and homeless and at the end of my rope. Desperate, with nothing but a gun in my hand, I faced another choice. End it all right here, right now, or fight my way back to the top. Needless to say, I chose to fight.
The man, the myth, the legend, the one and only Mr. Larry Rolla. Larry, how are you, Larry?
Good.
So what's going on in New Jersey, Larry? What's happening out there?
It's nice out today for a change.
I got to tell you guys how I met Larry Rolla. So I walk into this restaurant one time years back, and Maitre d comes up to me and he says, "Hey, Uncle G, I got to tell you." He says, "I got this guy. I know you're into movies and making movies." So he said, "I got to introduce you. This guy's got a great story. It's perfect. It's a blockbuster movie." I think the maitre d's name was Joe. And I got to thank him because, I would have never met such a cool cat, Larry. And, we talked, and I told him I was a little indie guy and trying to make films. And Larry told me a little bit about his story, and we exchanged numbers. And today I could say he's my friend. Larry, am I your friend, Larry?
Absolutely, that's what you are.
He's a no bullshit kind of guy. He tells it like it is. If he can help you, he'll help you. He'll go out of his way. He's really a stand up guy. I hope he can tell his story through a big blockbuster movie because his story really deserves it. What I want to do today is get Larry's side stories, all right? Because in this wonderful, colorful life of his, he had a lot of encounters. I mean, he's met people like Tommy Lucchese, Three Finger Brown, John Gotti, but he has those stories that most people don't know, like about Joe Pesci or about Tommy DeVito from the Jersey Boys, a whole bunch of stories. So I'm going to skip over telling his story, and I'm just going to ask him questions of some situations or stories that he exchanged with me. But if you want his real story, you can go listen to it on Larry's podcast. This way you get to know him a little better, and he'll be very detailed and thorough. I need a week if I go through his whole story. Let's start from that moment that you were broke. The bookie called you, right? Because you placed over $2 million in bets in the past years. But from that moment where you had your let's say downfall, you placed that bet without having any money. Let's start from there. Let's hear a little bit about that piece.
Well, yeah, I became addicted right around 1971. I became addicted to betting sports, and after losing about million and a half dollars um, that I had earned in horse racing, I had no more money, and I did something you're not supposed to do. I took a shot at these guys, the bookmakers, and I lost another close to $1 million, over 800,000. And that started a series of events that happened that in some circles it made me a legend, in some circles it made me an idiot. It was a tough 8 years, living through that.
Now you get called in, right? You have to meet with, I guess, the boss, and I think it was Atlantic City. Walk us through that.
Well, I ran out of money. I ran out of money, and, it was during the football season, during the middle of football season in 1971, I believe, and, but I had an addiction. It was a terrible, terrible addiction. I was strong enough to get out of it and just stop. It's the chase that gets you. You're always chasing the money. You're chasing the losses. So I had no more money, but I had the addiction, and I told him that. I said, "Listen, I'm going to Florida to buy some property. I'll be back in 2 or 3 weeks, so you won't hear from me." And they said what I knew they were going to say, and what I hoped they were going to say was, "No problem. Just call me up. We'll give you the line over the phone, and when you come back, we'll straighten out." Well, I went to Florida. There was no property. I just went to take a shot at them and chase the money and hope I won, but I didn't. And 3 weeks later, I was stuck. I think, probably 800,000, something around there, and, I had a choice at that time, either to stay in Florida and hide, or go back or kill myself. So I went back, and, that was it. I met I owed I there were 2 bookmakers I was dealing with. One was an old Meyer Lansky, wise guy, Jewish guy, who was about 85 years old, who was taking a lot of action up Monticello, and the other guy was a total whack job. Um, his name was Robert Cabert. Well, Cabert was his nickname. His last name was Basarchi. Uh, and and it was tough. It was tough.
And these guys, they're all made guys, right? They're serious guys, right, Larry?
Yeah, they were the Jersey crew. They were the Jersey part of the Gambino crew. Um, they were the Jersey faction of the Gambino crew, and Robert Cabert was the head of that crew, and he was a madman. He was a. I found a lot of these things out later on. I didn't know in the beginning. I just thought he was a neighborhood bookmaker. Um, I started off small with them. I started off with $2,000 bets, and then I paid every week. So naturally, they raise you. You ask for a raise, and before you know it, I was up to no limit, whatever I wanted to bet. And I was betting 20,000 a game with each of the guys. Each bookmaker, Barney Cutler was the Jewish guy up in Monticello, and Cabert was the Jersey guy. And I got both guys gave me no limits. I was bet 20,000 a game every week, 10, 11 games, and not doing very well.
Tell us what was going through Larry's mind in that moment. I mean, you're sitting there, you know that you're going to confront these guys because now you owe them a shitload of money. Tell us what was going on a little bit with Larry inside his
It's
head.
very simple. After the 3rd week out there, I couldn't stall any longer, and I said, "All right, I'm coming back." So Gilbert sent one of his guys to pick me up at the airport, and picked me up, and he said, "You want to go home and get what you have to get because he's waiting for us." And I says, "I have no money." And he says, "Well, I'll leave all the drama out of it. I'll just tell you what he says." I says, "I have no money." And he says, "Well, you're going to have a problem." And I says, "I know." He says, "Let me call him up and see what he says." So he calls up. He says he wants to see you tomorrow morning, 11 o'clock. So I said, "Okay." He says, "I'll pick you up." So he picks me up. We go down there. And typical Italian mob scene, little cafe in a corner, little round table, two guys plus Cabert sitting there smoking his little Italian cigars. And he just gets up. It was in Atlantic Highlands where I had to meet him. He gets up, he walks down the street, don't say a word. And we follow him, and they take me out on this dock. It was a big dock basin where they dock all the boats and yachts. And they bring me out on one of these 30, 40-foot boats. And they bring me downstairs. About a half hour later, they're out, I don't know, 4 or 5 miles in the ocean. They bring me upstairs. They stand me in a little bucket of water, little bucket, and they fill it up with water and a couple of bags of cement. It was about halfway up to about my knees. And they threw some cement in there, pumped some water in there.
I mean, I'm sure somebody would have thought of jumping off a bridge rather than getting whacked by these guys.
I knew I was in trouble. I knew there was a couple of things I knew. I knew that what I did, I wasn't supposed to do. I knew that if you take a shot at bookmakers, especially back in them days, they just first they give you a beating, and then if you run away and they find you, they just leave you in the street. So I knew that, and Cabert had a reputation, which I didn't know at the time, but I would surmise that if he is who he is, he did a lot of work. There's a lot of guys he busted up, a lot of guys he killed. I found out later that the number of murders was 19 that he did personally. So he was a wise guy, but I didn't know that at the time. But I knew that what I did, I shouldn't have did, and I knew there was going to be consequences. But I figured that it wasn't 500 that I owed him. It was 380,000 that I owed him. I owed 380 to the other guy, Barney Cutler. So I says, you're thinking while I was downstairs, all this goes through your mind. Is he really going to kill me for 380,000? That if he kills me, he's never going to get the money. Plus, it's not 380,000 he gave me. It's 380,000 I lost. I bet it didn't cost him nothing. Plus, I give him almost $1 million before in cash that I went broke. So I didn't think that's where you're a little afraid. You know, you just, it's just natural. It's just natural. You got to be crazy if you say you're not afraid. But when you think it out, I didn't think he was going to kill me. But then when he put me in the bucket, and they poured the cement in, I didn't know. I didn't know. It could have went either way. But as they were pouring that stuff in, he come down and he just looks at me and he says, "Sammy, let you go too far." That was the guy, his man, who I was dealing with. And he says, "Sammy, when you go, let you go too far. That's on him." He said, "You went too far. That's on you." And he said it right. It was right in my face. He says, "Now you tell me why I shouldn't let this cement harden and throw you the fuck overboard." And I says, "Well," I says, "'cause I could pay." And he said, "You could pay." So he looks at Sammy and he says, "You hear what he said?" And Sammy says, "I heard what he said." He says, "Let me tell you, boss," he said, he loses close to $1 million he paid every week. He's in a big action situation. Uh, if he says he could pay, you want to give him a shot, give him a shot." He says, "All right." He says, I'm going to make this, I think it was, I'm almost positive it was 380,000. He says, "I'll make it a Shylock loan, 2 points. Every week you come here with $7,500 big." He says, "And, you miss 1 week, you'll be right back here with no turning back." I said, "All right." And they pulled me out, hosed me off, put me back in Sammy's car. He drove me back home. And that was the beginning of me fixing more races than anybody in the history of horse racing, both standardbreds and thoroughbreds. I made the same deal with the Jewish guy, Barney Cutler. I went up to Monticello. I told him the same thing, but he wasn't a threat. He was 80 years old. He was an old Jew. He's retired. He was just taking action. And he was taking $200 bets from all local guys up there. But, in the beginning, I paid. He kept raising my limit. I paid every week. And there were times I give him 100,000, 120,000. I always paid. So it was no limit, whatever I wanted to bet. But he told me the first week that you screw up, he says, you cut off. But I never screwed up until that time. But I went up to him and I told him the same thing I told Bert. I had no money. I took a shot at you. Now, what do you want to do? You can either kill me or make the same. This is the deal I made with Bert. And he made the same deal. So every week I had to come up with like, say, 15,000 and take care of these things. And the only way I can make that kind of money was to fix races. That's the game I was in. So that's what I did.
So Larry, when you were fixing these races, right? I know you cared about the animal, you told us, right? So you never drugged the horse or never hurt the horse in any way, right? Everything was done through the jockeys. Is that correct?
Oh, yeah. There was nothing like that. I paid off the jockeys. I just paid the jockeys.
So basically that's where it started. And then you got to meet up and I guess work with or partner up with the guy from the Winter Hill gang, right, Larry?
Well, that's how it first started, really. I mean, the story, look, Frank, I wrote that book that you got facing me right on the desk there. The reason I wrote that book, I didn't want to write it. I'm not a writer. I never wrote a love letter in my life. But in 1974, when I was in all this trouble, I met a guy called Frank Collada. And Frank Collada, for those of you who don't know, and I don't know, you're in Italy now, so you probably don't know, there was a movie here in the States called Casino. And Joe Pesci played a guy called Spilaccio.
And who did Frank Collada portray in the project, Larry?
Well, Frankie Vincent, Joe Pesci played Tony Spilotro. He was the boss down there. The Chicago crew sent him down there, and Frank Collada was his button guy. He was his childhood friend, and
Okay.
he went down there. He was the guy that he was like the enforcer. He was the main. He was the second in command there under Tony Spilotro. In the movie, Joe Pesci played Spilotro, and Frankie Vincent played Frank Collada. But Frank Collada was also in the movie himself because he was the advisor. They paid him to be the advisor for the movie, and they were doing a lot of things wrong. And then finally, Scorsese, who was the director, says, "Well, why don't you just do it?" Like when it came to killing a guy, how to hold a gun, and all of that stuff. So they wind up putting him in the movie, not just is one of the hit guys. He did me a big favor in 1974. I won't go into how I met him, and I met him in prison, visiting one of the kids that worked for me. And he knew about the problem because of my friend who worked for me that was in jail. And when I went to visit my friend, he said he introduced me to him, and he said, "I think I'd be able to help you with your problem." And we made a lot of money. We made a few $1,000,000 together. Naturally, I had to go out to California to meet with Spilatro. So we created a little situation where I helped them with the fixed races, and we all made a lot of money.
You went out to see him?
Well, yeah, I couldn't do anything with Frank Collada without he was working for Spilatro. He was under Spilatro. You whatever Frank Collada did had to be approved by Spilatro. My friend was in jail for counterfeit money, and he became friendly with Frank Collada, and when I went to visit him, I found out that he had told Frank about my problem.
Was your problem resolved?
It was resolved by Spilatro sending 3 guys with me back to New Jersey, back to New York, and catching up with these guys who were my partner, who was with the Whitey Bulger crew, but they were just double banging. They were just doing the wrong thing. I was the one that was sending them to pay off the jockeys to fix the races. They were supposed to make phone calls to me to tell me what guys were out, the numbers of the races, and in the beginning, everything worked good. We was making a lot of money, but then the phone calls stopped coming, and I had to come up with 15, 16,000 every week. And I set this whole thing up, and he wasn't doing the right thing. I set the whole thing up for him. I gave him all the money he needed to pay off the jockeys, and then he wouldn't make the phone calls. He was betting himself and wouldn't call me. It's a long story. If I don't, I'm not even sure if you understand what I'm saying.
Larry, correct me if I'm wrong. You were never arrested and you were never a made guy, right? I mean, if you could say, right?
You're right. Oh, I did get arrested, but I got arrested when I was, before I got into the horse business. I was just, I was racing cars at the time, racing race cars. And I was 15, 16 years old. I was racing stock cars and racing cars at the drag strip. And when they break down, you needed money. I had no money. I was only a kid. I used to go stealing and robbing, and I got caught, and that's how I got arrested. But I never got arrested once I got into the horse business for any of the things that I did. In fact, I never got caught.
So, Larry, we're going to bounce around your story, all right? I'm going to go back and forth because, again, I want these side stories. And again, for anybody that really wants to know Larry's story, besides, you could go on Amazon and buy a book, Against All Odds. It's out there. I recommend it. It's a memoir book, and he's on social media, so you want to reach out and connect with him on Facebook. But he has his own podcast. He's done many podcasts where he tells his story, and his own podcast, I think he's up to 150. What is it,
160, but the first, I think the first 10 episodes, you see what happened, Frank? I wrote a book. And what happened was that thing we did in 1974 with Frank Collada. He called me up around 2018, and he says to me, he says, listen, I'm going to write a book about my life. By that time, he's been in and out of jail. He already became a government witness, but he was out of jail completely. And he wrote a book about his life story. He called me up around 2017, 18, something like that. And he says, listen, remember that thing we did in 1974? He says, you mind if I put that in the book? So I says, what do I care? I don't care. Put it in the book. So he writes the book. In fact, the book, I have the book right over there. Hold on.
Larry's getting a book, so we got to hold on. We can't say no to Larry, right?
Okay, here's the book. The book is called The Rise and Fall of a Casino Mobster. That's the book. So he says so he writes the book, he puts that chapter in, the thing he did for me in 74. So I see him at a wedding in Las Vegas about a year later, 2 years later. And he says, I do this mob museum stuff in Las Vegas. And I also do a tour. And he takes all the visitors to the mob museum. He has a big bus, and that's what he charges them. And he takes them out into the desert, and he shows them where all the bodies are buried, all the guys he killed. So he says to me at the wedding, he says, I sell my books at the tour during the tour, and I get asked more questions about your story than any other story in the book. He says, why don't you write your own life story? Because he knew for the couple of years I was with him, he knew of what I was doing. He was right in the middle of it. And he was very friendly with a lot of movie stars and a lot of actors and that whole bit. Very friendly with Nicholas Pileggi. So anyway, they convinced me to write a book. So I gathered up as much information as I could from the 50s to the 60s to 70s. It took me about 6 months making phone calls and talking to people. And we put together a little book. They told me self-publish it, keep it under 85,000 words, put in the good, the bad, and the ugly. So the book is probably 10% of my life, and each chapter is 10% of that story. But how much could you write with 85,000 words? I mean, you can cover 10 years. So anyway, that's why I wrote the book. The minute I wrote the book, I think it was Frankie Vincent sending it out to California, and Sony Pictures and Village Roadshow picked it right up. They wanted to make a movie and then a TV series right away. Pileggi was the writer along with Richard Price. And we went out, we met, and I think I sent you a picture of when they flew up and met with me at the Peter Luger's. And we met there. Everybody get together, and we talked about it being a TV series because there's too much material. There's too many stories so they all agreed it should be a TV series. But then what happened was they had bought the option for My Life Story, but the option ran out during them 2 years. They paid me for 16-month option. Because of my age, I can't wait another 2 or 3 years. And they says, well, there's nothing we can do. So I didn't resign. It should be a TV series because there's so much material. And don't forget, if you take The Godfather and you take Casino and you take Wall Street and you take Goodfellas and you take the Harlem Story, all the drugs, Nicky Barnes and that whole crew, and you put them all together, That's only half of my story.
Larry, I want to cut you off for a second because towards the end, we'll tell them where you're at now with your story and trying to make your movie. I just don't want to take away from my questions because, again, I'm going to bring you back and forth. I want those side stories, those basement whispers, right, Larry? Joe Pesci, right? Joe Pesci was great in that movie Casino. I mean, he's a great actor in all his movies. And but there's a story out there that I heard through the grapevine, a whisper, a basement whisper, that Joe Pesci is alive today thanks to a guy that you know, and not too long ago, you introduced me. I met him for the first time after I had heard your story. Can you tell us a little bit about that story with Joe Pesci, why he's alive today, and who saved his life?
You're talking about Juicy, right?
Yeah, yeah, Juicy.
Yeah,
Yes.
well, when Juicy
First, tell everybody who Juicy is, what's his name, and then we'll go back to the Joe Pesci story.
Juicy's name is Vincent DeMonica. He his nickname is Juicy. He grew up with Robert Bisacci, who's Cabert, the guy that I got in all the trouble with. He's out of jail now, but he spent 45 years of his life in jail. And he when he come out of jail, naturally I went to see him. We had dinner and the whole bit, and he he start telling me stories about, reminiscing way back and things that happened. And back when back in the probably when Pesci was just a kid, him and Frankie Vincent and Tommy DeVito, who does the guy who started the Four Seasons, and Alfred Natoli, they were all barbers. They were all kids. They were maybe 17, 18 years old. They were barbers. But because they grew up in Newark, New Jersey, it was all mob fested there. And on the side, they ran numbers for all the mob guys. And one day, Frankie, Joe Pesci, he, one of the guys that he took the numbers from, he was a bad guy, he's one of the killers for the mob up there. He hit the number. I'll make it simple. A killer bet a number. The number win. Joe Pesci goes to his boss and says, "This guy, the killer, hit the number." And his boss says, "You never turn that in. You never turn that ticket in."
One of the stories was that he pocketed the money. Did he put in that bet?
He did. So he says, "I did turn it in. If you don't give me this money, this guy will kill me." And the guy says, "You never turned the number in." So Pesci went to Juicy, and Juicy went to see his boss and says, "Give him the money." And he gave him the money. So he basically saved his life because that guy would have killed Pesci. So that's how Juicy saved his life.
All right. Otherwise, Pesci would have been dead.
Right.
So let's fast forward now, what, 45 years? There's a party for Juicy, right? He gets out of jail.
No, there's not a party. You're talking about when Juicy met Pesci?
Yeah, yeah, after all those years.
Yeah, they met at a repass. Juicy used to hang out at a catering hall called, I forgot the name of it, and, they had a repast one day, and and Pesci was at the repast, and, the name of the place was the Chandelier, the catering place, and, they ran into each other. They haven't seen each other since Pesci was a kid, and, so you're talking about, like, 50 years, 55 years. So what happened, maybe longer, uh, Pesci says, naturally, they hugged and kissed and everything, and he says, "How you doing?" So Juicy says, "How am I doing?" He says, I've been away." He says, "Whatever money I had in the street is gone." He says, "Nothing. I'm dead. I'm broke." So Pesci says, "All right, give me your address. I'll send you something," which was very nice. So Pesci, Juicy calls me the next day and he says, "Meet me for breakfast." So at breakfast, he tells me the story. So he says, "How much you think he's going to give me?" I says, "Well, there's no set price for something like this, but normally when you're dealing in that world, a guy gets out, you give him 5, 10,000, especially a guy saved your life." So he calls me up about a week later and he says, Pesci gave him $1,000. So
1,000? No.
I thought that was a little shitty for a guy who's saved your life and you're worth about 30 million.
Imagine that. All that money, $1,000.
I just thought it was a little shitty, but whatever.
Larry, tell us about the time that you needed money again, right? And you shot up to Harlem and you went to see one of Nicky Barnes's guys, and he was playing basketball with his kid, and he had a drum full of money. And tell us about that.
No, that was Nicky Barnes wasn't around. He had a guy with him called Robbie, who was really very, very, very low key guy, but a powerhouse. I told him I was looking for Nicky and I needed some money. And he told me he was playing basketball in his backyard. He had a big basketball court and he's playing basketball with his son. And he says, "Just go down in the basement there." He says, "There's some drums." He says, "And take whatever you need." And I went in the basement and there were 3 drums. I opened the first one, took the lid off, and it was all full of money. And I just counted out, I think it was 60,000 or something, whatever it was. And I come walking back out and I says, he says, "No, go ahead, just go." And I left. He was a nice guy. He was a really nice guy.
He continued playing ball. You went to the drum, took the money, and just left.
Continue play ball. Want to know? Just go ahead. Yeah, go ahead. Don't worry about it. Yeah.
And then I met that other guy thanks to you. That was part of the Nicky Barnes story, right? What was his name?
Oh yeah, that was Leon. He was on my podcast.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. Leon Batts. That's him from the Nicky Barnes crew.
He, Leon Batts. He's the only living member of that whole crew. And do you know that that he was hired by Will Smith? Will Smith has a production company, and he's going to do a movie of Nicky Barnes, who was the biggest drug dealer in Harlem, and he hired that guy Leon to be an advisor because he's the only living member of that whole crew. And he was on my podcast, and he told this story on my podcast that how they got caught, when they got caught, and how we made a few $1,000,000 betting the horses, the races that I fixed with Nicky Barnes. But Leon Batts, the only living guy now, and that movie got suspended, got put on hold because of Will Smith slapped that kid at the Academy Awards. Will Smith was going to play Nicky Barnes.
Harry, tell me about the time that you were hanging out in Florida in some club, and the first time you met Nicky Barnes's guys, right? I think they needed a table or something like that.
No, I was up in Monticello. This is how I met Nicky Barnes. I was in Monticello. It was around 1973. I was in all that trouble when I had to come up with all this money, and but I still went out every night. I went to the Concord Hotel every night. So one night at the Concord Hotel up in Monticello, the maitre d' came over to me and he said, "Larry," he says, "there's some neighborhood friends that are here, and the place was packed every night. During the summer, the place was packed because the Concord Hotel was the biggest hotel up there. They had the biggest lounge. It was the summer months, and I was very friendly with the owner of the hotel, Bobby Parker, and so naturally I got whatever I wanted up there, and I always had a front table in the lounge and the front table in the showroom, and the tables held 8 people. And normally I was always by myself, but I let other people sit there, friends of mine that I got to know. So one night, the maitre d' comes over to me and says, "There's some neighborhood friends that are here, and is it all right if I sit them at your table?" And I said, "Sure." So sure enough, when they come, he introduced me to Nicky Bonds. It was Leon Batts. It was a guy called Jazz, another guy, Robbie. I forgot. Anyway, and that's how I met them, and they were up there to see Natalie Cole's first ever live performance. On the road, and she was playing at the Raleigh Hotel, which was right down the street from the Concord. Now, I also had horses with the owner of the Raleigh Hotel, who was Manny Albert, and so we start talking, and the bottom line was I wind up getting them front table for to see Natalie Cole perform the following day, and I got them rooms to stay at the Concord. So we become very, very friendly, and that's when he found out that I was in the horse business, and then he told me that he could get down 5,000 a position, meaning 5,000 win, 5,000 place, 5,000 show on a horse race. And the reason he could was because he was dealing with the Genovese guy, Fat Tony, and he was betting that whole Harlem crew were betting 1,000,000, 2,000,000 a weekend just on sports. So they were gonna give him a courtesy bet of 5,000 a position on horse racing, and that's where I came into the picture, and for the last 3, 4 months, we made millions of dollars, and, uh, and that's what Leon Batts talks about when he's on my podcast.
What episode is that, Larry? Just in case somebody wants to go see that episode, your podcast episode.
I think it was the 5th or the 6th, something like that. Anybody wants to check out any of them podcasts about the book, it's on YouTube. Just go to YouTube and punch in "Against All Odds" by Larry Rolla, and you'll see all of them pop up. But the first 10 or 15 basically were about my book. After that, I stopped doing it, but then my friends made me go back on. Now we just talk about nonsense.
Now, let me ask you a question. Right now, you're dealing with these guys, and you're making all this money. Did Fat Tony from the Whitey Bulger crew ever find out about this situation?
No, no, I don't even think he cared because first of all, Fat Tony, I'm sure he laid a lot of it off. So, he spread it out a bit. And second of all, even if he did, they were losing millions every week just betting on all kinds of sports and other things. So the one bet that they would make with me on the races at Monticello, that didn't affect them. It didn't affect them at all.
Okay, all right.
And it lasted all the way up until they all got pinched, meaning the Harlem crew, Nicky Bonds and that whole crew. I mean, Tony never shut him down, never shut him out. They always he always took the bets.
Larry, I remember a story you told me that I thought was hilarious, where you were sitting at a racetrack and you were fixing your tickets, and you were with another person there sitting there, and who walks in? John Gotti.
Well, the racetracks are licensed by the state, and they don't allow any undesirables at the racetrack. And if you're licensed like I was at the time and your license was suspended, like mine was at the time, they won't let you're not allowed in the racetrack. So, but I had a horse to bet on that one particular night. A friend of mine gave me a horse to bet on. So I had a date and I took the date to the racetrack figuring that they wouldn't recognize me. So I walk into the racetrack, we go to the dining room, and we're sitting down having dinner, me and this girl. I'm waiting for the race to come up that I have to bet on. And who comes walking down the steps with 4 guys? It was John Gotti and 3 of his friends. And as they walk down the steps, we say hello to each other, and they continue walking down lower up against the glass in the dining room, overseeing the racetrack. So I continue eating, and I'm looking at the racetrack, and because it's glass, you could see the reflection, and through the reflection, I see that above me on the level, the these 4 or 5 there was the racing commission, the state police, on the track security. There were people looking down at me. They were just looking down. So I says to the girl, I says, "We better hurry up and eat because I think they're here to." No, no. What I said was, I says, "You see them guys up there?" I says, "Don't look. Look at the glass, and you see the reflection. You see them guys? They're gonna ask John Gotti to leave, so he better hurry up and eat." And so, sure enough, a couple of minutes later, they come walking down the steps, and they stop at my table. And they said, "You Larry Rolla?" I says, "Yep." And he says, "You're gonna have to leave." And they left John Gotti there with 3 or 4 guys that probably killed 50 people in their life, and they asked me to leave. Uh,
I just think that story is great. I mean, you're thinking that they're there for him, and then they were there to kick you out of the racetrack. That's funny. But anyway, Larry, if you don't mind, tell us this other story, which I really like that you told me, where at the same time that you were paying all that vig every week, a church burnt down in your neighborhood, and you decided to help them out.
from '71 until 1978, I lost over $1.5 million in my money and paid close to 3 million in interest, big, during them years before I paid everybody off. So there was a total of $5 million that was just wasted away, and and I was very busy fixing more races at more racetracks than anybody in the history of horse racing. Uh, the only church in Monticello, which is where I live and where I moved my mother up to, and where I was racing, the church burnt down. So the priest comes to the racetrack, because Monticello is a very small town, and he asked for help from the horsemen. Now, Monticello is a small town, it's a very small racetrack, and all the drivers and trainers up there that race horses, they don't have any kind of money. They just live in paycheck to paycheck. So I wind up, me and the owner of the racetrack, Charles Slusky, who I was very friendly with and owned the Neverly Hotel and Monticello Raceway. Together, we put together about $300,000, and we gave it to get to the priest to fix the church. So what happened was, there was a girl in town that got pregnant out of wedlock, and my mother, who I moved up there, was babysitting the baby because she used to drive the school buses. And so my mother babysitted the baby. His name was Eric. And my mother calls me one day and she says, "Lynn, who's the mother, would like you to be the godfather for her child and get him baptized." So I said, "Okay." So my mother calls me a couple of weeks later and says, the priest, wouldn't baptize the kid because she had the baby out of wedlock. So I went to the church, uh, and well, naturally, I talked to Lynn first, and she said, "Yeah, because I wasn't married, I had no husband, and had the kid out of wedlock, he wouldn't baptize him." So I went to the church, and I went to see the priest, and I sent a friend of mine here to get a kid baptized. She's my friend. My mother babysits the kid, and she wants me to be the godfather. And you says you won't baptize the kid because he has she don't have a husband." I says, "Let me tell you something, Father. You don't give this girl a date to baptize this kid, I'll burn this fucking church down. I built it and I'll burn it down. Here's her number. Well, she she got the kid baptized." And that's another thing it's sad to say this, but a lot of these man-made rules in the Catholic religion of bullshit. Of bullshit. God didn't write them. The priest write them. That's his own rule, and it's bullshit. The bottom line was he made the phone call within 2 minutes and gave her a date, and the next day, the next weekend, that kid was baptized, and I was the godfather.
That story, Larry, reminds me of the Godfather scene where Diane Keaton asks Al Pacino, "How'd your father get him to sign?" And he tells the whole story where he sent Luca Brasi and said, either your brains or your signature is going to be on that contract. That's what that church story reminds me of.
The sad part about life, and you learn this as you get older. By the time you're my age, you heard just about every bullshit story. You heard about all the cons, and you realize that when you have nothing in common with people that can help, they don't help. It's sad.
I love that line, Larry.
And if you have money, everybody says money's the root to all evil, and that's bullshit too. Because without money, your marriage won't last. Without money, relationships won't last. Without money, families don't last. And without money, and some people say that without money, it brings the family closer. The only reason it brings it closer is you wind up in one fucking room with 20 people. That's the only reason it brings you closer. But without money and connections, with money and connections, you can get almost anything done. Without money and connections, it makes no difference. It makes no difference how good the story is, how good the project is, how good the business is. If you show up, if you show up with your hand out, you're going to get turned away. If you show up in a Rolls Royce and you play the part, the chances are you're going to get what you came for. Which means that you just got to prove that you're worthy of the people that can help you to help you. Never let them see you cry, and you have to be able to walk away from. You just got to be able to get up from the table and leave. But sometimes it's so difficult to do that. It took so long to get to that table, and then if they're starting to ask too many questions, or it's tough to leave. You don't want to leave, but you got to leave. Sometimes you got to stand your ground and leave, because if it's a good enough deal, they're going to call you back. But it's just a tough world out there.
Be sure not to miss part 2, as Larry will reveal many more basement whispers.